5 tips for overcoming frustration and impatience. Now, frustration and impatience may be something that you don't think you need to overcome or don't want to overcome, and that's completely understandable. But if you take inventory, you might notice that there's a sort of blanket of anxiety and irritability over life when we have a lot of frustration and impatience. Also, it can be surprising, actually, how much of this we experience when we start to look at it, we start to dig in a little bit. For instance, I see it very frequently. Every single day I see people who are quite frustrated, people who are feeling quite impatient. It puts people in their heads, it makes them numb, it makes them internal, not experiencing the external world, not feeling present, etc., etc. So it's valuable to take this up if you're interested in doing it and if you've identified that you tend to get frustrated and impatient. So here we go. So tip number 1 is just understand that when you start to dig into this, it's a bigger process than you might realize. It has more depth to it. It's more deeply rooted than you might initially realize, and it doesn't just go away overnight. So tip number 1 is just be patient. This takes some work, it takes some time, it takes some inquiry, and ultimately patience. So, which, is the opposite of frustration and impatience. But the thing to understand is this can just take a while. It's not overnight, and don't get too frustrated with the process of digging into frustration. Understand that once you get through this, things will look very different. Things will feel much more peaceful, but it can be a bit of a process. Tip number 2 is understanding frustration and impatience. What I mean by that is understanding not just how it feels when you experience them, but actually understanding the way the world looks through their eyes, the way it feels to be the impatient one. If you were to put yourself right inside the emotion impatience, or if you were to put yourself right inside the emotion of frustration, what do you feel? What do you think? How do you see the external world? How do you see time? How do you see yourself and others? So let's do that. Frustration. Frustration feels like things right now, the way they're going, are not the way I think they should be going. Period. Or things are not happening the way I think they should be happening. So one key to this is if you're shoulding yourself, if you're shoulding all over yourself, using the word should even internally, you're probably experiencing some degree of frustration. Right? Because is there any way things should be? Well, I don't know. Maybe there's a way things could be after change or whatever, but in this moment, once your brain, your mind has taken a snapshot of reality of what's happening, can you actually say that it should be different than what I just observed? And if you do say that, what is the effect? What is the cost? Well, the cost is it's a game you'll never win. You'll never turn what's already happened, which you've already taken a mental picture of, into some idealized version of what it should be. It just will never, ever, ever happen. And that's why, generally speaking, frustration just feels uncomfortable. It doesn't feel good. So to reiterate that, and I will encourage you to actually put yourself into frustration's point of view when you're feeling it, because this can be theoretical if you're not actually feeling it. So the next time you feel frustrated with something, with a situation, a person, anything, just put yourself in the shoes of frustration and say, okay, how am I looking at this experience right now? How am I looking at this set of conditions? How am I looking at this person right now? Well, I think that person shouldn't be doing that, but they are doing that. They already did that. That's you couldn't be aware that they're doing it until they already did it, right? So shoulding in that moment does nothing for you, but leads to frustration. It leads to a friction between you and life, between your internal world that says it should look like this and the external world which says it does look like this. Which is bigger? Which is more real? The external truth of reality, all of the conditions, all the other people, the objects, the position of the planet, the position of the galaxy, or your internal mental world that says, no, I think I know how it should be? Which one has more reality to it? I'll let you answer that. Yeah? So what we do is we have this strange sort of arrogance about how things should be or could be based on our insistence that they are. And what's really weird is, as intelligent as we are, we never actually notice that it's never worked, right? Frustration has never, ever, ever worked. It's a game you will never win. But you have to get into its shoes again and again in real time when you're experiencing it to see the absurdity of it. Until you do that, you won't see the absurdity. You just won't see the absurdity of it because the mind is too quick. The brain is too fast. So now let's look at impatience. Impatience says, this is what's happening right now. Whatever's happening, whatever situation you're in. Impatience says, in my mind, I'm imagining what will be happening in 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 1 minute. And I think that should be happening now, right? That's what it is, isn't it? You're doing something and you just want to be done with it, right? You want to beam yourself into the future where that thing is complete, that task is complete. Well, first of all, why? Second of all, has it ever worked at all? Have you ever beamed yourself into the future to get over something that for some reason you're overlooking the belief that you don't want to be doing it anyway? It never works. It's never worked. It also doesn't cause planning. We think it causes planning. We have some mistaken beliefs around it, but that'll come later on. So just see the world through the eyes of impatience to understand it first, and then see it's a game you just can't win, okay? So that's number 2. Number 2 is see the world through the eyes and the embodiment and and standing in the shoes of impatience and frustration. Really, you have to really do this in real time, enough till you understand the mechanism. If you don't understand the mechanism, you'll never get underneath these, okay? Number 3 is, once you can get yourself into the shoes of impatience, once you can get yourself into the shoes of frustration, be willing to feel uncomfortable. This is a very important step. If you overlook any step in this process, you'll probably miss it. The process just won't work for you and you'll just stop doing it. It's critical to actually take these steps. So step number 3 is you have to feel the discomfort. Why do you have to feel the discomfort? Well, first of all, we don't want to see how absurd it is that we actually believe we can change reality by just imagining it is differently in this moment. So we don't see that. And then we don't want to feel the discomfort of that. So we kind of bypass 2 steps or 2 parts of the cascade of frustration and impatience, and we move right to distraction, right? So what do you do when you feel impatient? You distract. One way you distract actually is imagination. You start just fantasizing about other things, or you change the radio station, or you smoke a cigarette, or you call somebody, or you start shopping, right? All these things are just distractions. And if you look closely, you'll see when these emotions are functioning, these emotions of frustration and impatience, when they are there, when they're operating, you'll see that those distractions are actually to avoid the discomfort. So step 3 is don't avoid the discomfort, feel it. Maybe you can only feel it for 20 seconds before you have to go do something or distract yourself or start thinking or whatever. But stick with it. Once you do this more and more, you'll start to be, well, more comfortable in the discomfort. It's a physical experience. The body won't like it. It'll say, no, 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 I don't want to be here. It'll feel squirmy. It'll feel yucky. It just has a general feeling of, I don't like this. So that's step 3, just feel it. Feel the discomfort. And let's say your body mind, it's intelligent. Like it's gonna figure this out over time. It figures out, oh, when I process reality in this way that's impossible, when I expect impossible things, it's uncomfortable. That's the recipe essentially. But you can't just make a belief about it. You have to actually go through it multiple times. And you will make the connection at a deep level. Now, number 4 is, once you've been able to go through these first 3 steps, specifically step 2 and 3 in an actual experience, when you're knowingly experiencing frustration and impatience, then you're ready for number 4. And number 4 is simply be a little more open throughout the day, looking for the moments when you feel frustrated and impatient. Now you might wonder, why did that not come first? Well, it didn't come first because until you feel them, until you really identify them, it can be hard to recognize how frequently you actually feel frustrated and impatient. But once you really know the signature of them, once you've dialed in a few times, then it'll be more obvious when you just open your attention up. So, do you need to do this all day, every day? No. Could you pick a day to do it all day? Sure, why not? Could you make a 30-day challenge to be alert as much as you can throughout the day to any time you feel impatient or frustrated? And when you do go through these steps, sure you could. So number 4 is just be more open to it and just be observant, be alert, be sensitive to your environment internally and externally, which has a lot of intrinsic and extrinsic value aside from what we're talking about. But when you do, then be willing to go through this cascade. When you do identify frustration or impatience, be willing to go through this cascade. Okay? That's number 4. Number 5. Once you feel comfortable doing steps 2 and 3 in real time, you've done it several times, you're feeling confident that you understand how this functions, how this works, you have become a little more comfortable with the discomfort, you can stay with the discomfort for a while, and you've taught yourself to be open throughout the day and picked up moments when you felt frustrated and didn't even realize it. So you've essentially accomplished the first 4 steps. Then it's time to apply number 5. Number 5 is very simple, and that is, once you've spent some time in the discomfort and your mind is calmed down a little bit, it's not jumping, trying to get somewhere else, trying to distract endlessly, but you know that you're just feeling the simplicity of the discomfort of frustration or impatience. Number 5 is to ask yourself a few simple questions. You can rotate these questions, you can ask them in a row, or you can ask one question for a few days or a week or a month and then switch to another one. Question number 1 is, what is the cost to me when I believe that things could be other than they are in this moment? Meaning, when I actually believe the story of frustration, what is the cost to me? So, do you win the game? Do you ever change reality suddenly into the way the mind pictures it? Or does it just make you feel irritable? Does it make you feel avoidant? Does it make you distract? Does it lead to habits, right? So the question simply is, what is the cost of believing that worldview that comes into play when I'm feeling frustration and impatience, and specifically when I don't fully recognize I'm feeling them, right? When I fully recognize I'm feeling them, I can just drop into the actual sensations and the discomfort, and over time they will subside. But when I'm partially overlooking them, that's when this unseen worldview is kind of running me like a puppet, right? So this is why this 5th step comes last, because this is kind of nuanced. It's easy to totally overlook all this. So question number 1, what is the cost to me to believe this worldview of impatience and frustration? That by thinking it shouldn't be this way, I can actually make it that way, but it never happens. It's a game you can't win. Impatience, believing I can suddenly beam myself into the future where I'm done with this, or I'm past this uncomfortable area and I'm to the place where I feel more comfortable. Has that ever worked for you? In this exact moment, it won't, and it can't, right? So it's a game you can't win. Question number 2 to ask yourself is specifically in reference to the feeling of discomfort. When you've been able to kind of sit in that sort of discomfort, that maybe restlessness, that squirminess for a while, and you've gotten sort of used to it to where you don't feel like you have to immediately run from it. Ask yourself, in that space, in the space itself, in the feeling itself, is there anything that compels me to react, to have to do something? Or can I just stay here? Do I have to do anything here? Do I have to start thinking about something else? Do I have to distract myself? Do I have to come up with a solution? Or can I just stay here? Do I have to react? And just kind of look around in the feelings, the sensations, especially where you feel it in your body. That's question number 2. Now, this question can be a little bit disorienting or confusing at first because you're like, what am I looking for? But what you're looking for is anything that takes you to the next step of this reaction process. And the more you see that there's nothing that actually carries you to the next step, nothing that's going to transport you to the other shore, something about this whole process will fundamentally slow down and it can stop. But that can take time. So that's question number 2. Question number 3 is, where am I feeling sensations in my body? Now I want you to kind of scan the body and feel anywhere that you feel sensations. And again, this is when you're in that discomfort gap. So, do you feel it in your belly? Do you feel it in your chest? In your throat or neck? Do you feel it in your head? Do you feel it in your hands or feet or your legs or arms? just feel around, and it may be in different areas. So you may feel some kind of tension in the chest and a little bit of squirminess in the belly and maybe a little tightness in the throat. That's just an example. It can be anything. It can be more on one side of the body. It can be moving through the body. But I want you to attune your attention and teach yourself to attune your attention to the actual sensations in the body with no goal at all. So question number 3 is, where am I feeling the sensations associated with this situation? And again, no goal, not trying to conclude anything. You're just trying to come in contact with those sensations. Just like you're wading into a pool of water. I want you to get as close as you can until you're in the sensation, until you are that sensation, to coalesce with it. And again, it can move around. It might feel like a distinct pinpoint area in one part of the body, like in your jaw, and then it might feel like a more vague space around the chest. It might even kind of be outside the body and inside the body. There's no rules to where it can be or how it can feel. The key is, where do you actually feel? Go to the feeling itself, go to the sensations. That's number 3. So that's the 5-step approach. I want people to let me know how it works for you, but give it some time, patience, and your attention, and I think you'll see changes.